So India makes drugs for the entire planet. Literally. So why is it so dangerously dependent on one country to keep doing that? That's the paradox we're cracking open right now. Here's a number that should genuinely make you pause. India produces 20% of all generic drugs in the entire world. By volume. That's 1 in every 5 generic medicines on the planet coming out of Indian factories. Sounds like a superpower, right? But now look at where India actually ranks when you measure the money the pharma industry makes. Number 14. China? Number 2. That gap right there. That's the whole story. Now think of it this way. Imagine India is a massive car factory, churning out millions of vehicles every year. But almost every single engine inside those cars? Imported. From one supplier. One. Those engines, in pharma terms, are called APIs. Active pharmaceutical ingredients. These are the actual chemical compounds that make a medicine do anything. Without the API, your tablet is basically just chalk. And that one supplier India is hooked on? China. A staggering 60 to 70% of India's APIs come straight from China. And for something as fundamental as penicillin, the antibiotic that's been keeping people alive for decades, India's dependence on Chinese supply is close to 100%. So if China sneezes, India's entire medicine cabinet catches a cold. Not a metaphor. Literally what happened during COVID. Now why does China own this space? Simple. Their APIs are typically 20 to 30% cheaper than anything India can produce domestically. China built these massive integrated chemical manufacturing zones. Think entire cities, just dedicated to making pharmaceutical raw materials. And then stack government subsidies on top of that. Indian manufacturers just cannot compete on price. At least, not yet. And that's the quiet, uncomfortable truth sitting at the heart of India's pharma story. A global manufacturing giant, fragile right at its foundation. So what's the government doing about it? That's exactly where we're headed next. So what did India do about it? Well, the government decided to put real money on the table. Enter the PLI scheme, production-linked incentives. Basically, the government pays manufacturers cash rewards based on how much they actually produce domestically. For pharma specifically, we're talking 15,000 crore rupees earmarked to boost Indian manufacturing of 41 critical APIs and key starting materials. The chemical building blocks that go into making those APIs. The goal? Make India less dependent on China, one molecule at a time. And this isn't happening in isolation either. There's a global trend called China Plus, a 1-1. Multinationals are deliberately adding a second supplier outside China just to hedge their risk. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? For Indian pharma companies that can step up as that second basket, this is genuinely a golden window. Now here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone wins equally. The clear beneficiaries are companies that actually manufacture APIs domestically. Firms like Aurobindo and Divi's Labs get both the government incentives and a surge in demand from buyers looking to cut Chinese reliance. Vertically integrated players. Think Sun Pharma, Biocon. Companies that control their own supply chain from raw material to finished drug, they're also sitting pretty. They don't depend on anyone else. On the flip side, smaller generic drug companies that have been running on cheap Chinese APIs. For them, switching to costlier Indian-made inputs means margin pressure, at least in the short run. And if India-China tensions spike suddenly, API prices could jump overnight. Real volatility risk. The bottom line is this. The PLI scheme is a structural shift, not a quick fix. The companies that invested early in domestic supply chains, they've quietly built themselves a serious competitive moat. But here's the bigger question. Can India actually pull this off at scale? Next, we look at what the data really says about India's long-term pharma ambitions. But here's the thing. Even if India completely solves the China API problem, is making cheap generic drugs really the long-term play? Because fixing the supply chain is one thing. Building an industry that actually prints money, that's a whole different conversation. Think of it this way. Selling generic drugs is like running an unbranded grocery store. You move massive volumes, sure. But the margins are razor thin and every competitor is selling the exact same rice at the exact same price. Nobody wins big. Innovative drugs, on the other hand, that's like launching a patented snack that nobody else can legally copy for 20 years. You set the price. You own the shelf. The margins are extraordinary. That's the gap between where India is today and where the real money actually lives. Right now, India is the world's unbranded grocery store for medicines. And China is the engine supplier keeping that store stocked. The PLI scheme is India's attempt to at least build its own engines. Critical first step, no question. But the long-term prize is moving up the value chain entirely. Original drug discovery, patented molecules, biologics. We're talking complex medicines made from living cells like insulin or next-gen cancer therapies. And some Indian companies are already making that move. Biocon is building biosimilars. near identical copies of these complex biological drugs that command prices way above standard generics. Sun Pharma's specialty drug portfolio is another example of this upward shift happening in real time. So what does the next 5 to 10 years actually look like? Probably a two-speed industry. Domestic API manufacturers grinding steadily upward on PLI incentives and import substitution. And then a smaller, sharper group of R&D heavy innovators chasing the high-margin global market. Here's your takeaway. India's pharma sector is at a genuine inflection point. The China dependency is a known vulnerability, and it's being actively addressed. But the smarter long-term bet is on companies that aren't just making cheaper versions of old drugs. They're building the next generation of medicines the world will pay a serious premium for. The factory is being upgraded. The real question now, is it becoming a lab too? Follow us for more updates like this. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and X.